My name is Nick B. Ponter, and I am the author of Connor Jackson and the Memory Thieves, a wonderful story about the secret world of moles. I have also written a lovely little Christmas story, a nice short story, and I'm going to read it to you now. Connor Jackson and the Christmas Thieves, based on the story Connor Jackson and the Memory Thieves. The long, dagger-shaped icicle hanging from the eaves glistened in the crisp cold of the night sky as the drop of water ran down its length and froze at the tip. The villages were covered in a soft carpet of fresh snow, sparkling in the reflection of the full moon and star-laden sky. It was Christmas Eve, and the Molehamptons were ready for the festivities. All buildings adorned with bright flashing lights and tinsel-covered Christmas trees, shining out through living room windows. It was the first white Christmas for years, and everyone was excited. My name is Connor Jackson, and I am sitting in my bedroom surveying the idyllic villages of Upper and Lower Molehampton, sat astride the River Angler, slowly meandering its way down the valley to Angleton. I could clearly see Farmer Rye's old stone farmhouse and the majestic willow tree leaning over the river in the light of the full moon. Directly below me, the lawns of Trout Lane, as you might believe living in a village called Lower Molehampton, were festooned with molehills. This was particularly annoying for my neighbour, Mr. Lawnsworthy, who so proudly tended his beautiful garden. But did you know that people were not the only ones to celebrate Christmas? From within the snow-covered molehills, flashing lights could be seen and the sound of Christmas carols heard from deep below the ground. Yes, moles also celebrate Christmas. What do you know about moles? Not much, I fear. You probably believe them to be blind, dig unwanted tunnels, and destroy your garden. There is truth in one of the points, but as far as the other points are concerned, no, not true at all. And how do I know this? Because I lived in the secretive world of moles deep below the ground. Only a few weeks ago, I returned to my life on the surface after the most incredible adventure. I can tell you from my own experience that moles administer the world directly below our feet. They store our memories in glass jars, reprogram humans and other creatures for future assignments on the surface, and steal everything they can get their hands on to equip their world. Have you ever wondered where your socks go? Put 10 in the washing machine and only 9 come out. The romantic sound of church bells and Christmas carols reverberated in the air around the villages. But then the serene Christmas atmosphere was suddenly broken by the sound of a car screeching to a stop and giggling voices getting out. A look down Trout Lane immediately exposed the culprits, the Kennedy brothers. They were well known in the villages for not being the brightest, thieving everything they could, and often getting caught in the act, or shortly after. Who else but the local villains were returning with what looked like some red sacks jam-packed with items. They put the sacks inside their house, got in their car and drove off again. I naturally suspected the worst. Sergeant Dawson, the rather rotund and cheerful village policeman, sat at his desk with a very contented look on his face as he sipped on his tea and munched his Christmas biscuits made by his loving wife, the crumbs landing on his chest. He was happy for a particularly good reason. It was Christmas, and every Christmas Day he dressed up as Santa and handed out presents to the local children, an event he so much loved. The last of the parents had only just left after delivering brightly wrapped gifts they had bought for their children. Now the presents were safely stored in 5 red sacks in his back room. He switched on the radio to listen to Christmas tunes and sat back in his chair, feet up on his desk. What could go wrong? His peaceful evening was rudely interrupted by a firm knock on the door. "Mr. Jackson, what a surprise! What brings you here this Christmas Eve? It's got nothing to do with your kidnapping a few months ago, has it?" "Oh, good Lord, no. I've just witnessed something rather suspicious, and I thought I should better inform you." "Probably the Kennedy brothers, no doubt." "Correct, Sergeant. Who else? I saw them carrying red sacks into their house, which looked exactly like yours, and I do not believe they have got any intention of giving Christmas presents tomorrow morning. Suspicious, I think you may agree." Sergeant Dawson's face turned ashen as his eyes darted towards the back room. For a man of his size, he moved rather quickly as he sprang out of his chair, dropping his biscuits on the floor in the process. He ran across the room, pulled the door open to reveal 5 red sacks. "Whew, phew, and I feared they had been stolen from under my very nose." But, not satisfied after the brothers had raised my suspicion, I thought it better to have a closer look and open the first sack. My assumption proved to be correct. "Sergeant, please have a look." The sergeant pulled out a present from the bag and found it to be rather light. He then picked out another one, and another one. They were all light. Somebody had indeed swapped the real presents, and all 5 red sacks in Sergeant Dawson's office contained empty presents. The real presents, which the parents had bought and wrapped so lovingly, were gone. "Oh, just how divine!" squawked Felicity Forsyth Twike. She sat in front of the fire with her nephew Bartholomew. The 2 Forsyth Twikes were swilling their whiskies and hooting with laughter. "Oh, what an absolutely marvellous idea to steal the presents for those ghastly children, and right from under the nose of that nincompoop Sergeant Dawson. If only this lowly rabble had ever thought of giving me presents, things could be quite different for them. After all, I am their mayoress, and that surely must mean something." "I couldn't agree more, Auntie Felicity. But I'm not sure entrusting the Kennedy brothers with this mission was such a clever idea." "Oh, it was. Believe me, my dear Bartholomew. When Sergeant Dawson hands out the empty presents tomorrow morning, the Kennedy brothers will have the freedom of the village to steal whatever they want. Yes, put even more sorrow on that dreadful Lower Molehampton rabble." "Exactly. Now Lower Molehampton and those ungrateful residents will enjoy a different Christmas tomorrow, one with crying children. Merry Christmas, Auntie Felicity. Merry Christmas, Nephew Bartholomew." Sergeant Dawson was in complete shock and incapable of reacting to this situation. But I had a plan. Now, I know you don't believe my story about the world of moles, but it was on their help I would call after promising the sergeant I would save Christmas. I went home and wrote a message to Colonel Pickle and put it in one of my many single socks. Yes, you know about this problem. Then I perused the many molehills which peppered my lawn and carefully approached the largest, one so huge it came up to my knee. A periscope protruded out of the top, following my every movement. Were you to observe molehills at night time, you would also see such metal objects and probably ask yourself what they were doing down there. I lay on the frozen ground, placed my sock next to the hill and looked directly at the periscope and into 2 eyes reflecting out of the glass. "I have an urgent message for Colonel Pickle," I whispered directly towards the periscope. Even though Connor Jackson was well known to those below the ground, the mole still had the shock of its life as my face appeared so close in front of the periscope's viewing glass. As soon as I had gone, the mole climbed out and retrieved the sock. You think moles scurry along their tunnels? No, moles are comfortable creatures, and they convert plastic tubes which they steal from pneumatic postal systems into dangerous transport shuttles. The mole got into one of these tubes, and with a small explosion, the shuttle burst into life and shot off down a tunnel at hair-raising speed, down towards deep below the ground. It was an urgent matter, and the head of Special Operations had to be given the message immediately. "Well, what have we got here, Sergeant?" Colonel Pickle demanded. "An urgent message from Mr. Jackson, sir." The Colonel's beady eyes grew ever so wide as he read the letter. "Sergeant, muster the troops immediately." "But, sir, it's Christmas." "No buts. The Forsyth Twikes are up to no good again, and we've got to help Mr. Jackson save Christmas." Colonel Pickle himself addressed the platoons of camouflaged moles. He barked out his orders, and the furry soldiers immediately spread out and disappeared up and away through numerous molehills. I was now back in my bedroom, armed with binoculars, observing lines of military moles pouring out of different molehills and into the village. Quite what they did, I do not know, but the strange noises and things disappearing on this particular Christmas Eve were spoken about for years to come. It could not have been more than an hour when the sections of moles scurried back, pulling socks laden with scavenged goods, and disappeared unnoticed back down the molehills into their world below. Peace returned to the Molehamptons, and all of the lights began to be slowly switched off as excited children eagerly awaited Christmas Day. Deep below the ground, magical things were going on. Showers of sparks were flying through the air, and smoke escaped from vents in big bursts as the metal-working factory was operating at full steam. With every free mole drafted in to assist in this mammoth task, teams of moles feverishly handcrafted presents from the metal acquired in the villages. Even Mr. Player, the former toy shop owner of Upper Molehampton, was called upon. When I say called upon, I mean that his memory was retrieved from the warehouse. And down here, under a dull blue light inside the special interrogation machine, a miniature Mr. Player in a glass jar assisted with his knowledge for making toys. Under his supervision, the sound of drilling, hammering, grinding and polishing echoed around the tunnels through the night as piles of spoons, knives, forks, pots and car parts were turned into the most beautiful children's toys imaginable. Had you been sitting next to a molehill on the surface that night, you too would have heard the strange noises from down below when the industrious moles managed to save Christmas. Like you, Sergeant Dawson knew nothing about the world of moles, and my assurance that I had everything in hand went completely ignored. He remained unconvinced and dejected as he sat at his desk with his head in his hands, asking himself how he would explain to the children that this year there would not be any Christmas presents. He had managed to summon up some motivation and attempted to apprehend the Kennedy brothers, but unfortunately found the house empty, and his sacks with the Christmas presents remained out of his reach. The sergeant was the nicest man you could imagine, and the theft of the children's Christmas presents just too much for him. He was inconsolable. "Sergeant," I said excitedly, "I have the presents. Christmas has been saved." Early in the morning I was woken up by a loud and repeated knock on my door. 5 red sacks, bulging with mountains of presents, beautifully wrapped with the names of the children elegantly written on the wrapping paper, were lying in front of my door. I immediately drove to the police station and found the sergeant still sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. "How did you get them back from the Kennedy brothers? I was there, but they had left." "I didn't. I had the presents made," I sheepishly replied, knowing he wouldn't believe me. "From elves?" he sarcastically asked. Similar, just a bit furrier." We looked at each other in an almost uncomfortable silence, looking at the sacks and then at each other again. "Well, aren't you going to get ready?" I asked. Sergeant Dawson now bolted up out of his chair, ripped the sacks open, and started grinning like a Cheshire cat. "Yes, I suppose I should." Droves of excited children and parents started arriving at the town hall in eager anticipation of Santa's arrival. Felicity Forsyth Twike and her nephew Bartholomew were hiding behind a curtain, smirking to themselves about the scene they soon expected to see. It was exactly 9 o'clock when the sound of a ringing bell and a booming voice signalled Santa's arrival. "Ho, ho, ho, children, and a very Merry Christmas this is too." Sergeant Dawson entered the town hall and struggled across the room, dragging the 5 sacks behind him. They were heavier than in previous years, as this time they were filled with toys made of metal instead of plastic. He sat down on a large chair, surrounded by the presents, and when the first child sat on his lap, the sergeant's eyes glinted in childhood excitement. The boy eagerly pulled off the wrapping paper and peered inside the box with great curiosity. Then his face turned into sheer joy as he pulled out a beautiful toy car made of shiny metal. "Mum, Dad, look at what Santa's given me, a toy car, and it's handmade." The children in the town hall were beside themselves in excitement as they unwrapped their presents to find beautifully crafted metal toys, cars, prams, aeroplanes, animals, and anything a child could wish for. The parents looked quite rightly perplexed, finding their plastic factory-made toys had somehow been exchanged. But the children looked lovingly at the parents, as they were obviously aware of how much effort they had put in to create genuine handmade presents. "Oh, what ghastly act has been committed here?" The 2 people peering out from behind the curtain were in utter shock. I have no idea, Auntie Felicity, but I fear our plan has been foiled." Yes, again," said Felicity, devastated. "Not only did somebody change the empty boxes for presents, these are handmade presents. How is this possible?" And in such a short time, Auntie Felicity, I am dumbfounded." At the Forsyth Twike mansion, 5 red sacks were delivered and put under the Christmas tree. When the presents were opened, Felicity and Bartholomew found each box contained a single sock and a note from Sergeant Dawson. "Merry Christmas to the Mayoress of the Molehamptons." The children were delirious, the parents happy, Sergeant Dawson delighted, and the Forsyth Twikes distraught. "Merry Christmas, Connor Jackson." The voice had come from deep below the ground. I looked at the molehill which had just sprouted up outside the town hall and replied cheerfully, "And Merry Christmas, Colonel Pickle." If you want to find out more about the secret world of moles, then I would suggest you read Connor Jackson and the Memory Thieves. What do these crafty moles do below the ground? And who is Colonel Pickle? I wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas.